we should mention that you have a master's degree in creative writing from NYU, and you wanted to be a writer. You told me your main influences were Kerouac, but also Hemingway, Salinger, Bukowski, Orwell. What drew you to storytelling in that medium of writing? What aspect of the human experience were you trying to put down on paper?
Well, it started with being a fan first and being inspired and reading. And it's not only being transported to a different world or into a different person, but also, you know, the way that stories can touch emotions in you and trigger feelings sometimes you didn't even know you had.
Mm.
And that was very appealing for me. And the big challenge with it is, and I think this is for anybody who creates anything, is putting yourself out there.
Mhm.
Um, to some degree, there's a lot of ego that goes into that moment where you say, well, I've been reading, 1984 or Green Hills of Stranglethorn, and I think it's amazing. Um, and now I'm going to try to write something that somebody is going to read.
Mhm.
That's a giant leap of faith. It's a moment of putting yourself out there completely. And there's got to be some part of that that's ego. There's some part of it that's masochistic.
Mhm.
And I think for people who want to create and build stuff, they can't help but to do it. You don't really have an option. That's just how you're wired, and you're going to do it anyway. And, I admire people like Dickinson who can just write all the poems and leave them in a drawer to be discovered by somebody else.
Mhm.
That's one way to go about it.
Yeah, Franz Kafka, a lot of the stories he wrote never published, and he asked for all of them to be destroyed. And then it's only because of his friend that ignored his request that we even have many of his stories. So, like, to be that kind of, I mean, clearly there's some masochism there, some tortured soul.
Yeah.
But then there's also the ego, like you mentioned. I'm always entertained by the story of James Joyce when he was a young man, 18, 19, declared that he's going to be the greatest writer of the 20th century. And he turned out in the eyes of many to be one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. But there's like millions of kids just like James Joyce, writers, they're declaring exactly that turn out not to be. But that is, in many cases, maybe most cases, you have to have that ego to
Yeah.
say, yeah, right. I read 1984 and now I'm going to write the next 1984.
Yeah. And I do think ego is a big part of it. It's one of the many lessons I've learned. Hearing your Kafka story is funny because fast forwarding to how my writing career ended,
Hmm.
I literally threw away everything. I mean, in a dumpster. I used to keep copious notes, like journals, my writing journals, everything I ever read, every story idea. I probably had 20 volumes of just handwritten notes. And then I also kept personal journals of just, to keep the writing habit up of just, what happened in my day, how I was feeling, all of that. And then either digitally or typed, I had all of my manuscripts and I threw it all in the dumpster.
What was that decision? Do you remember that decision? What was that? What was that like to just take that part of your life and just put it in a dumpster?
Yeah, it was I think it was necessary. It was necessary. This is like rationalizing it after the fact, which is easy to do,
Yeah.
But at the time, I think I was so broken and so defeated with failure that I needed the moment. It was like throwing in the towel for a boxer, It's that moment of like, I'm not going to win this fight and you need to move on from it. And if there was any element of that sitting around, I'd be tempted to try again or bring it out of the drawer 10 years later.
We should mention that you did give it a real try. You've mentioned receiving over 170 rejection letters in 1 year when submitting your stories. So there's a lot of rejection. So there's a
Yeah.
long chain of rejection. And then what was that like? The rejection.
It was hard. I had moved from New York. I did the most terrible, dumb thing that I knew I was doing at the time. I had a really great group of writer friends from grad school in New York, and I think writing's a very lonely, solitary thing, but weirdly, writers kind of support each other and just who do you give the story to? You don't want to give it to your mom or dad. You kind of want to give it to somebody who's going to really punch you in the nose and tell you what's wrong with it. And I had left that writing circle to move back to California.
Did you take a bunch of drugs, take your typewriter, and drove
No,
across across the United States, and then wrote a book about it, or just to take Kerouac as an example? Anyway, sorry. You
I
went.
might have been more successful had
Yeah.
I done that.
So sorry. So you went back.
So I moved back to California and I did it for a girl. And I think within 2 months of moving back, we were broken up. So, and I knew it when I was standing in my studio apartment when it was empty in New York and I was about to close the door for the last time. I had that little me on the shoulder saying, dude, what are you doing? You're making one of those epic life mistakes that is going to come back to haunt you. And I ended up alone in California, and I think it was a good 3 years that I structured my life where I was gonna write for 8 hours a day because it's that writer's habit, like, you have to just force yourself, "This is a job, this isn't a hobby. Whether I like it or not, rain or shine, sick or healthy, I'm gonna write for 8 hours a day," and I did. I was fortunate, like I said, my dad had his company and he hired me as a research associate. So I was calling up, generating name lists for a recruiting company. And I would take, whenever there was East Coast assignments, I would take those so I could start at like 5 in the morning. And I created all of this space for me to write. And I had a dog named Jack
Mm-hmm.
who was he was Jack Russell Terrier, and so everybody's like, "You're a writer. You named your Jack Russell Terrier Jack." I'm like, I named him after Jack Kerouac. It's
Mm-hmm.
poetic and epic." And
Yeah, of
I just
course.
look like a dumbass, but
Yeah.
it was just me and this dog, and I was writing, all that time intensely, and this was, mid to late '90s, so even though internet existed, email was very primitive, and you had to send a manuscript off, like printed paper,
Mm-hmm.
to all like, I was trying to get short stories published in literary magazines, and you had to send, envelope with return self-addressed stamp, so it was expensive too, like, if you didn't have money, you were just there was a cost to it, to
Mm-hmm.
every single one of them.
You had to pay for the rejection letter that you would eventually receive.
Yeah, and the, like, big thing that you were hoping for was that the editor would write you a note with the rejection letter, like,
Keep
um
keep going.
yeah, and you'd, like, cling on to this, like, it was like, "Oh, Glimmer Train said, showing promise," and you just hang on to that for, like, a week, pretending like that was but it was just soul crushing. And I really stuck and I became more and more isolated. Part of that was leaving that group of writing friends in New York. I'm prone to just introversion anyway, the type
Yeah.
of person I am. Breaking up with the girlfriend at the time, I just sort of fell into that world of like all I was doing was writing. And it broke me. Like I went into very deep and heavy depression. I drank too much. I really had a problem with alcohol. And all of those things compounded into just deep, deep depression. And there wasn't like a magic rejection that broke me, that would have been epic if
Mhm.
someone out there is like the dude who I'm the dude who broke Jeff that one day. But
Yeah.
I just had a moment where I said, this is going to destroy me. Um, I don't want to be discouraging to anybody because I really do believe, you hear it so much, you have to work for your dreams, never give up. We're trained this way, never give up. The universe, actually, maybe not the universe, a group of editors at literary magazines across the United States was telling me it was time to give up as a writer. I wasn't cut out for it. And I stopped.
Sometimes, closing a door is required for another door to open. That's one of the
Yes.
hardest things to do is to walk away.
Yeah, and I think rightly so, our parents, our coaches, our mentors train us not to give up.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of us take pride in that. I'm never going to give up. I'm going to do this come hell or high water. And sometimes there's that reality, especially when you're now in your mid 20s, where you have that moment of am I really going to be this? Am I ever going to sort of find the light here? And maybe, and it's so hard to have this moment. Maybe this isn't my calling in life, especially when you don't know what the next calling is going to be.
God, it's so painful. It's because you've invested so much of yourself, of who you are, of the dreams you've had, of this just whole conception of yourself. And you're watching yourself slide down in terms of becoming isolated, suffering more and more. And then you just have to somehow figure out how to get out of that. And it is true. In that situation, the way to get out is the dumpster, is to
Yeah.
cut it off. Is there advice you can extract from that? There's a lot of young folks who are in that same situation.
Yeah, this is one of those hindsight things where, having gone through it and ended up okay on the other side, which you don't know at the time, when you're a young person in your late teens or early 20s, there's so much pressure on you. And I really think adults don't help. Every time you run into the younger nephew or whoever and you start to say things like, "Oh, what's your major? What are you gonna do with that? What do
Yeah,
you wanna be?" It's such bullshit to do to a human being,
yeah.
you know?
You're so lost in the world. I mean, most of us are lost our entire lives, but especially in your 20s, you're lost. So questions like, yeah, what are you doing? What's your major? What's the career and so on? That's not the point, man.
Eh
I'm trying to find I'm trying to move through the world. I'm trying to run through the world to find the thing that sparks my heart, to find the passion, to find what I'm meant to be on this earth for. And they're really, I mean, that is a real hero's journey of searching as a young person. That's a real, all the adults with their wisdom, they've stopped searching often. They've done the lazy, the comfortable thing. They found their thing, and so now they look back. They don't remember how much suffering and how much uncertainty that young people have to deal with.
there's confusion, there's pressure, the pressure we exert on younger people for having it figured out it's insane. So the advice that I always give, and it sounds so stupid, this sounds really trite, but um, focus on what you want to do, not what you want to be. The pressure that society kind of puts on us is, oh, do you want to be an astronaut? Do you want to be a firefighter? Do you want to be a writer? Do you want to be a game maker? And I think we get lost in the trappings of a vision of what that role is
Mhm.
and how to perform as a fake actor in that role versus when you're off the clock and no one's asking you any questions,
Mhm.
you know, you're not at Thanksgiving dinner and your uncle's pressuring you into, you know, what your future is gonna be for the rest of your life. When you go home, how do you spend your time? Like, what makes you happy? What brings you fulfillment? And through those paths, you're gonna find out what you're gonna become, not what you wanna be.
Mhm.
It's what do you wanna do?